Q Review Print Speaking to the Blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the Herald Scotland Podcast, recorded at the Bishop Briggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @CuneReview, that is @CuandReview. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@cunereview.com. That is INFORMATION@CUENDREVIEW.com, or by calling 0141 772 3976. That's 0141 772 3976.
The Herald Scotland, on Wednesday, the 5th of June 2024. From the news section. Edinburgh-Ibiza plane diverts to Bristol after sexual offence report. This article was written by Jodie Harrison and is being read by me, Connie. A plane full of Scottish holidaymakers had to be diverted to Bristol following reports of a sexual offence being committed mid-flight. Police arrested a passenger after the flight from Edinburgh broke off its journey to touchdown in England on Tuesday. Avon and Somerset Police said it received information leading to the arrest of a male passenger at Bristol Airport. The flight, which took off on Tuesday morning, was heading to Ibiza. A passenger on the plane also needed medical attention after the plane landed, police added. Avon and Somerset Police said a Jet2 flight from Edinburgh to Ibiza was safely diverted to Bristol Airport this morning. The crew raised concerns regarding a passenger who has received medical attention upon landing. Attending officers subsequently received information prompting the arrest of a male passenger on suspicion of a sexual offence. He has been taken into custody. We can confirm this relates to an alleged incident on board the aircraft. Inquiries into what happened are at an early stage and continue. A spokesperson for Jet2 told the Scottish Sun, "We can confirm that flight LS789 from Edinburgh to Ibiza diverted to Bristol Airport earlier today, so that police could offload a passenger following an incident on board. As this is a police matter, we cannot comment any further at this stage. We have arranged for a standby aircraft and crew to fly other customers to Ibiza." That article was from the Herald Scotland. It was from the news section. It was written by Jodie Harrison, and it was read by me, Connie. The Herald Scotland, on Wednesday the 5th of June 2024. From the news section. Police to crack down on buskers in Glasgow city centre. This article was written by Jenny Sanderson and is being read by me, Corey. More police officers will crack down on nuisance buskers in Glasgow's city centre, the council has announced. Performers who are too loud, poor quality, or stay for too long could face fines or have their instruments confiscated, the council said, as it explores acquiring greater powers to enforce the rules. It comes after Glasgow City Council launched a public consultation following regular complaints about street performers, which received one of its biggest ever responses. While the vast majority of the 2,700 respondents felt busking is worthwhile and should continue to take place, more than half felt noise levels are an issue, which needs to be addressed. Other issues raised include poor performance quality, repetition and limited repertoires, and over long duration at pitches. In response, Glasgow Council said it will install new signage in Buchanan Street alongside an enhanced presence of police officers and community enforcement officers over the summer. Recurring complaints and the identification of buskers and performers persistently breaching the code of conduct may result in stronger measures such as fixed penalty notices or equipment being seized, said the council. A Glasgow City Council spokesperson said, "Buskers and street performers are for many people a welcome feature of the city centre experience, and to make this experience as positive as possible, we asked for views on how this activity can best take place." The scale of the consultation responses received underlined the support for these performers, but also indicated some issues which can impact the quality of a visit to the city centre, as well as the experience of local residents, businesses and workers. In response to this, the council and its partners have identified a series of actions to help promote the Buskers' Code of Conduct and respond to instances where some do not respect the code. Both Glasgow and Edinburgh councils are exploring the possibility of acquiring greater powers to enforce the busking Code of Conduct. Currently, local authorities only have advisory powers and have to refer to Police Scotland for action. Glasgow's Street Performing Code of Conduct warns buskers against performing in the same location for too long, more than 2 hours, poor quality and repetition of songs, performing too loudly, and causing obscuration in the street. Buskers may face prosecution and or confiscated equipment if they sell CDs or other merchandise without a street trader's licence, perform after 9 p.m. with a loudspeaker/amplifier, ignore requests by Police Scotland to reduce volumes and or move on, willfully obstruct the passage of pedestrians. That article was from the Herald Scotland. It was from the news section. It was written by Jenny Sanderson, and it was read by me, Corey. The Herald Scotland, on Wednesday the 5th of June 2024. From the news section. SQA to be replaced by Qualifications Scotland in 2025. This article was written by Garrett Stell and read by me, Corey. The Scottish Government has proposed new legislation to replace the Scottish Qualifications Authority, SQA, with a new body called Qualifications Scotland, staffed by former SQA personnel. The new Education Scotland Bill, published Wednesday morning, announced a series of other changes alongside the creation of Qualifications Scotland. The new bill proposes establishing the office of His Majesty's Chief Inspector of Education in Scotland, which would take over the regulatory and inspection powers from Education Scotland. The Chief Inspector would be named by royal appointment and not subject to the direction or control of any member of the Scottish Government. Although not included in the bill, the Government has also promised to reform Education Scotland, creating a new-look department that focuses more exclusively on curriculum design, implementation and oversight. Both the new Inspector and Qualifications Scotland are expected to become operational in autumn of 2025. It has been 4 years since the Scottish Government announced that it would be scrapping the SQA and replacing it with a new qualifications body. In the intervening period, the Government has spent almost £1 million on reviews of the education, qualifications and exam systems. A significant portion of those reviews have considered changes to the SQA. The majority of the new bill deals with the new qualifications body. However, it is unclear how Qualifications Scotland will operate differently from the Scottish Qualifications Authority. For one, the legislation suggests that there will be minimal, if any, change in personnel. With effect from the transfer date, any person who, immediately before that date, was employed by the Scottish Qualifications Authority is transferred into the employment of Qualifications Scotland. This apparently includes senior SQA leadership, including current SQA Chair Shirley Rogers, who will take on the same role with Qualifications Scotland. And Qualifications Scotland's purview will also be similar to its predecessor. The bill states that Qualifications Scotland will have the authority to craft qualifications, whether for itself or others to award, and to devise a programme of learning to match the qualification. In a statement following the bill's publication, the SQA welcomed the establishment of Qualifications Scotland and committed to using the milestone to build further momentum behind our ambitious transformation. SQA Chief Executive and Scotland's Chief Examining Officer, Fiona Robertson, said that the SQA will work in the meantime to see out its responsibilities during the transition. SQA Chair Shirley Rogers said the bill offers a catalyst for change. Our organisation is already looking to that future and progressing towards it. We will continue to work with and for learners, parents and carers, as well as our hard-working teachers and lecturers across Scotland's schools and colleges to make sure that we seize this generational opportunity. Our future success is fundamentally dependent on how we work in partnership across those communities, and with our trade unions and staff. We are absolutely committed to that collaborative approach. It is unclear how the SQA will directly impact or work alongside Qualifications Scotland in the build-up to the 2025 transfer, especially given the expected transfer of SQA staff. The legislation does, however, include a provision which states that any SQA actions taken now will be treated as if they were done by Qualifications Scotland, once the new body is officially formed. The bill describes a new Learner Charter and Teacher and Practitioner Charter, which require Qualifications Scotland to engage with students and staff and publish what each should expect from Qualifications Scotland. Qualifications Scotland will be required to review the charters every 5 years. The new qualifications body will also include between 9 and 13 members to be appointed by ministers, a chair, a convener of accreditation committee, a chief executive, and between 6 and 10 others. Those remaining members must include at least one with knowledge of the interest of persons undertaking a relevant qualification, i.e. students, 2 who are teachers, 2 who are college teachers, and at least one with knowledge of the interests of the staff of Qualifications Scotland. Education Secretary Jenny Gilruth said that the new legislation is meant to put pupil and teacher experiences at the heart of decisions about qualifications and assessments. Greater independence for the new inspectorate body will see the power to set the frequency and focus for inspections moving from Scottish ministers to His Majesty's Chief Inspector. This is a significant change and will increase confidence in the independent role of inspectors in assessing and identifying strengths and areas for improvement across our education system. The Scottish Government's programme of education and skills reform will drive improvement right across the education system. That's why we've taken time to engage with learners, teachers and other professionals across the education and skills sector to ensure these changes meet the needs of future generations. The Scottish Government and Scotland's teaching unions have been approached for comment. That article was from the Herald Scotland. It was from the news section. It was written by Garrett Stell, and it was read by me, Corey. The Herald Scotland, on Wednesday the 5th of June 2024. From the news section. STV headquarters in Glasgow sold in deal worth £37 million. This article was written by Scott Wright and is being read by me, Corey. The headquarters of STV in Glasgow is one of two buildings in Scotland which have changed hands for a combined £36.6 million. London Metric Property has sold the broadcaster's Pacific Quay home and an 85,000 square feet office in Dundee, which is occupied by the telecommunications giant BT, to a single buyer. STV has a further 17 years to run on its lease for the 60,000 square foot premises, while the BT deal on Tayside runs for 17.5 years. London Metric acquired the assets when it merged with LXI REIT, Real Estate Investment Trust, in March this year. Andrew Jones, Chief Executive of London Metric, said, "These are good, well-let assets. However, we continue to exit non-core sectors and geographies and reinvest in sectors where we have a competitive edge and which are enjoying a structural tailwind." London Metric was advised on the sale by Lismore Real Estate Advisors. That article was from the Herald Scotland. It was from the news section. It was written by Scott Wright, and it was read by me, Corey.
This is from the Herald Scotland on Thursday the 6th of June from the news section. Police officer sentenced for indecent communications in Tayside. This article is written by Craig Williams. A serving police officer has been sentenced for indecent communications with a child. Cameron Fraser, 28, was sentenced to a 6-month community payback order on Wednesday. He previously pled guilty at Kirkcaldy Sheriff Court on Tuesday, May the 7th. Now that criminal proceedings have concluded, Police Scotland Professional Standards Department will begin proceedings for gross misconduct. Chief Superintendent Helen Harrison, Professional Standards Department, said, "Fraser's offending and behaviour was appalling. In committing this crime, Fraser believed that his online offending would go undetected. However, there is no hiding place, and as a result of our investigation, he will now rightly face the consequences of his action. Any form of child sexual abuse is a serious criminal offence, and we encourage anyone with concerns about a child at risk of abuse or a potential victim to contact police immediately. It is right policing is held to high standards, and we will always support officers and staff acting with our values and standards at heart. Those who reject what we stand for do not belong in Police Scotland." That article was written by Craig Williams. This is from the Herald Scotland on Thursday the 6th of June from the news section. Rishi Sunak, a liar, says Labour. This article is written by Andrew Learmonth. The Tories are continuing to defend Rishi Sunak's warning that Labour will hike taxes by £2,000 despite Treasury officials distancing themselves from the claim. Shadow Scottish Secretary Ian Murray said the Prime Minister was a liar who had resorted to using made-up figures. During Tuesday's televised debate with Sir Keir Starmer, the Tory leader repeatedly claimed independent Treasury officials had costed Labour's policies, and they amount to a £2,000 tax rise for everyone. The claim comes from a Treasury document produced by the party, estimating the cost attached to potential Labour policies. It claimed that the difference between the money that Labour would raise from its policies and the amount it would spend would be a deficit of £38.5 billion over 4 years, amounting to around £2,094 for every working household. However, the Treasury's Permanent Secretary, James Bowler, said ministers had been told not to suggest that civil servants produced the figure, as officials were using assumptions provided by politically appointed special advisers. In a letter to Labour's Shadow Treasury Chief Secretary Darren Jones, He said that the £38.5 billion total for Labour policies in the Tory document includes costs beyond those provided by the civil service. Costings derived from other sources or produced by other organisations should not be presented as having been produced by the civil service, he said in a letter to Mr Jones on June the 3rd. I have reminded ministers and advisers that this should be the case. Nevertheless, Energy Secretary Claire Cortino repeated the claim on Wednesday, saying it was based on official costings from the Treasury. She told BBC Breakfast, "I've worked in the Treasury and I can tell you that these are brilliant independent civil servants and they would not be putting anything dodgy in there." On Times Radio, Ms Cortino even claimed this is something which has been signed off by the Permanent Secretary of the Treasury, adding, "Those costings have been done by independent Treasury civil servants." Mr Murray, the shadow Scottish Secretary, said, "Rishi Sunak is a liar who has resorted to using made-up figures to try to revive his flagging campaign. This is a sign of how chaotic and desperate the Tory campaign has become. The Tories have hiked tax 26 times and made £71 billion worth of unfunded promises. The only person putting public finances at risk is Rishi Sunak. Labour will treat public money with respect and we will not hike income tax, national insurance or VAT. This is an opportunity we cannot afford to miss. By voting Scottish Labour, we can make sure we can get rid of this rotten Tory government and restore integrity, honesty and economic stability in politics." A snap poll from YouGov suggested the Prime Minister performed marginally better, with 51%, making him the winner against 49% for Sir Keir, among people who expressed a preference. But a Savanta survey pointed to a more convincing victory for Sir Keir on 53%, ahead of Mr Sunak on 47%, excluding those who said they did not know. Perhaps the most telling findings from the YouGov survey were that 62% found the ITV debate frustrating and just 17% found it a helpful exercise. The SNP's Kate Forbes was asked about the debate during a campaign stop in Linlithgow. She said the lack of mention of Scotland was revealing. "I think last night's debate tells us everything we need to know about this election. First of all, Labour and the Tories will turn up in Scotland and make nice comments, and then you watch the debate and they don't mention Scotland once. And that's precisely why we need SNP MPs in Westminster, making sure that the next government doesn't forget about Scotland." That article was written by Andrew Learmonth. This is from the Herald Scotland on Thursday the 6th of June, from the news section. XL bully exemption deadline fast approaching in Scotland. This article is written by Jodie Harrison. XL bully dog owners in Scotland have been warned the clock is ticking on getting their pets registered. From the 1st of August 2024, it will be a criminal offence to own the breed without an exemption certificate or to have applied for one by that date. XL bully dogs have been responsible for a number of deaths and attacks on people, and it is now an offence to sell or breed the animals in Scotland. Existing pets must be muzzled and kept on a lead in public and must be registered to get an exemption from the ban. So far, 768 exemptions have been approved north of the border, with the deadline for online applications is midnight 31st of July. Postal applications must be received by the 15th of July. To get an exemption certificate, owners can apply online or by post for a £92.40 fee, while they must also obtain third-party insurance and neuter and microchip their dogs. Owners who decide not to keep their dogs can apply for compensation. Victims and Community Safety Minister Siobhan Brown said, "I welcome the fact that 768 owners have already applied for an exemption for their XL bully dog. We are now halfway through the time period available to apply for an exemption, and I encourage owners who have not yet applied to do so now. The scheme is necessary to allow for XL bully owners to legally keep their dogs in the long term, while agreeing to adhere to the necessary safeguards that will help to reduce any risks to public safety." That article was written by Jodie Harrison.
The Herald, Friday the 7th of June, from the news section. Here's what's cutting through in the general election. Cutting through is one of those annoying clichés beloved of self-important young things as they bustle from one important meeting to the next with people who share the same political values. If it isn't cutting through, it doesn't matter. Never mind integrity or principle. Mary McCallan, Cabinet Secretary for Net Zero, obliged with a classic of the genre when she declared that Michael Matheson affair is not cutting through with the great Scottish public and remains an issue only for the Holyrood bubble. In brackets, annoying cliché number 2, close brackets. Given that 2/3 of the Scottish electorate are sufficiently exercised to hold the view that Mr Matheson should pack his trunks and never be seen in Holyrood bubble again, this may have been a miscalculation on Miss McCallan's part. Apart from being plain wrong, it reflects a deeply patronising attitude of the new political class, the hoi polloi. They assume, don't really understand these matters, and are too busy with their simple pleasures to care. Keep it in a bubble, runs the logic, and we can do what we like. Only when it cuts through is false humility required. The truth is that Mr Matheson's behaviour was more likely to cut through than other cases involving much larger sums of money. There was no complexity about the basic facts. Mr Matheson tried to access £11,000 of public money to which he was not entitled. It is difficult to think of any other context in which this would not constitute an offence. Small wonder it cut through. Another cutting through conundrum, which interests me, involves the £450 million which the Scottish Government has allegedly handed back to the European Commission, having failed to spend it during the past 8 years on anti-poverty programmes, rural development and other priorities covered by these EU structural funds. I am particularly exercised as a resident of the islands which, historically, benefited hugely from structural funds. There was an excellent organisation called the Highlands and Islands Partnership Programme, which embraced local authorities and other agencies. It drew on decades of experience to negotiate the complexities of EU funding, dealing directly with Brussels. In one of its first centralising acts, the SNP closed down HIPP and brought everything to do with EU funding under political control, branded as Scottish Government. I can say with certainty that if the previous structure had remained, the Highlands and Islands would not have lost out on a pound of EU funding. Actually, it is not a case of handing back, since they have never had the money, but of failing to claim it, because there were no eligible schemes put forward. It seems agreed that £190 million is already lost, while the best the Deputy First Minister Kate Forbes could muster was that they would endeavour to spend as much of it as possible by next year. It is true the accounts do not have to be finalised until next year, but the end of this month is the deadline for putting forward proposals to the Commission. It seems unlikely that what has not been achieved in 8 years will be turned round in 3 weeks, so Miss Forbes is merely kicking the can of accountability down the road. The Scottish Government has a woeful record in dealing with EU structural funds over the past decade, and was repeatedly censured and suspended by the Commission for non-compliance with the rules. Heaven knows what that is translated into in terms of funding lost. But here's the question. If it is eventually confirmed that hundreds of millions have been lost to Scottish communities through incompetence and lack of attention to what is attainable, while constantly gurning about not having enough money, will that cut through to the attention of the Scottish electorate? A lot will depend on the ability of the SNP's political opponents to persist in turning it into a £450 million issue of neglect towards the needful, which offends people's instincts of decency and propriety as much as Michael Matheson's 11 grand. That's the real prerequisite of cutting through. Which takes me to Tuesday night's encounter between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak, which wasn't really a debate, but a series of 45-second thrusts with almost no engagement over ideas and policies. It was also an illustration of how, at the serious end of politics, cutting through is an objective which demands ruthless tactics. Mr. Sunak went into this event with only one instruction: to repeat the phrase £2,000 tax rises under Labour as often as necessary to stick in people's minds. It did not require any backing up with evidence, and indeed the programme's format was designed to avoid any such obligation. Just repeat, repeat, repeat. This was bound to happen because it always does. There has not been an election in the past century at which the major weapon in the Tory armament has not been to send out scare stories about how taxes would rise under Labour. Elections have been won and lost on the success or failure of that message. Mr. Starmer eventually dismissed the figure as nonsense and seemed genuinely astonished that a Prime Minister presiding over the highest tax rates in 70 years should fight on this particular ground. Otherwise, he might have got his ridicule and rebuttal in earlier. Those who have complained about Keir Starmer not making spending commitments should ponder how much easier Mr. Sunak's task would have been if there was a natural basis on which to hang his figure. But when the Tory machine is in action, backed up by its friends in the press, evidence is the least of its requirements. The problem for Mr. Sunak is that it is not only what you want to cut through that actually cuts through. For most viewers, I guess the impression of Sunak was of a cocky and entitled individual who interrupted far too much, while Starmer's weakness was to be just a little too decent. Maybe that is not such a bad thing to cut through. That was an article by Brian Wilson. The Herald, Friday the 7th of June, from the news section. Rishi Sunak accused of D-Day dereliction after skipping ceremony. Rishi Sunak has apologised after skipping a major international ceremony to mark the 80th anniversary of D-Day in order to carry out a general election TV interview. The Prime Minister said it was a mistake not to stay in France for the international event after he had attended the earlier British ceremony in Normandy. Mr. Sunak has come under intense criticism after it emerged he missed the event with fellow world leaders to head back to the UK for an ITV interview. The Prime Minister said, "I care deeply about veterans and have been honoured to represent the UK at a number of events in Portsmouth and France over the past 2 days, and to meet those who fought so bravely. After the conclusion of the British event in Normandy, I returned back to the UK. On reflection, it was a mistake not to stay in France longer, and I apologise." The Prime Minister attended the UK national event at Portsmouth on Wednesday, and then the British ceremony in Normandy on Thursday, the anniversary of the Allied landings on D-Day. Labour accused Sunak of a dereliction of duty after the Prime Minister left commemoration events in France before a gathering of the world leaders on Omaha Beach. Sunak instead travelled to an ITV interview to defend claims he had made about Sir Keir Starmer's tax plans, which the Labour leader has said were mistruths. Sunak had appeared in Normandy earlier in the day to pay tribute to veterans, but returned to Britain before the ceremony was over, while his rival, Sir Keir, remained alongside Joe Biden, Emmanuel Macron and Prince of Wales. It later emerged that Mr. Sunak had given a broadcast interview on the same day, a clip of which was shared by broadcaster Paul Brand. Mr. Brand told ITV News at 10, "Today was the slot we were offered. We don't know why." Shadow Paymaster General Jonathan Ashworth said, "The Prime Minister skipping off early from D-Day commemorations to record a television interview where he once again lied through his teeth is both an embarrassment and a total dereliction of duty. Our country deserves so much better than out-of-touch, desperate Rishi Sunak and his chaotic Tory party." The Conservative Party have been contacted for comment. Political cut and thrust had largely been paused on Thursday morning as the 80th anniversary of D-Day took centre stage, and Mr Sunak appeared in his prime ministerial capacity at various commemoration events. Tory sources had played down the diplomatic impact of the PM's absence in Normandy later in the day, pointing out he will be meeting other G7 leaders next week at a summit in Italy. Mr Sunak had used his interview with Mr Brand to reject Labour accusations that he lied by saying the party would hike taxes by £2,000, claims which were later criticised by the UK statistics watchdog. The Prime Minister said the Labour leader was obviously very rattled after he repeatedly deployed the attack line during a TV election debate earlier this week. Mr Sunak had claimed that independent Treasury officials have costed Labour's policies and they amount to a £2,000 tax rise for everyone. But the Treasury's Permanent Secretary, James Bowler, said ministers had been told not to suggest civil servants produce the figure. In the interview, the Prime Minister said, "Keir Starmer and the Labour Party are obviously very rattled that we've exposed their plans to raise tax on people, and that's what it demonstrates." Asked whether the numbers were instead based on assumptions drawn up by Tory advisers, Mr Sunak said no, the analysis and the working is done by Treasury officials. The row stems from a document produced by the Conservatives which made a series of assumptions to estimate the cost that might be attached to potential Labour policies. It said that Labour's plans had a £38.5 billion deficit over 4 years, the equivalent of £2,094 for every working household, which the Tories claim would be filled with tax hikes. In a statement on Thursday, the UK statistics watchdog, which previously warned political parties to use figures appropriately during the campaign, suggested the Conservatives had failed to make clear their calculations. The Office for Statistics Regulation said, "Without reading the full Conservative Party costing document, someone hearing the claim would have no way of knowing that this is an estimate summed together over 4 years." Campaigning for the general election will kick off again in full on Friday, with the Prime Minister out in the southwest promoting the latest Tory pledge to raise the high-income child benefit tax threshold to £120,000. Meanwhile, Labour is promising the first-time buyers could use the state as a guarantor for their mortgages if it wins the July the 4th vote. That was an article by Jodie Harrison.
The Herald on the 7th of June and the Voices section. Struggling public services are influencing voters in Scotland by Rachel Ormston. If 2019 was a Brexit election, it could be argued that this summer's unexpected general election is shaping up to be a public services election. Opinion polls place public services, especially the NHS, but also education in Scotland in particular, at the top of the public's list of issues that will shape how they vote on July 4th, well ahead of constitutional issues like Brexit or Scotland independence. New Ipsos research out this week shows that people across the UK are extremely pessimistic about the recent direction of public services, and people in Scotland are among the most gloomy. Just 4% of Scots feel that public services as a whole have improved in the last 5 years, compared with 81% who say they have got worse, a net score of minus 77, compared with minus 70 for the UK as a whole. Looking across English regions and devolved nations, only people in Wales are more downbeat, with a net score of minus 81. A more detailed look at satisfaction with individual services shows that there are no services with which over half people in Scotland are satisfied. Provision of recycling facilities attracts the most satisfaction, with 49% satisfied and 30% dissatisfied, while people in Scotland are particularly negative about the state of our roads, with 81% dissatisfied with road maintenance and just 5% satisfied. Overall, GP services are one of the services people are more satisfied with. However, those satisfied, 42%, with GP services only just outnumber those dissatisfied, 39%. And comparing findings for this latest survey with one conducted by Ipsos in 2021, GPs along with hospitals are among the services that have seen the sharpest falls in public satisfaction. The proportion satisfied with these NHS services has dropped by 28 points and 37 points respectively in just 3 years. Other services that have seen particularly steep declines in satisfaction include the police and schools. However, for all the services Ipsos asked about in both 2021 and 2024, satisfaction is now lower. At the UK-wide level, our data shows that the perceived deterioration of public services is largely attributed to UK government politics. 45% thinks public services have got worse because of policies implemented by the UK government. Rising inflation, 40%, and poor management of within the public sector, 39%, are also common explanations. Of course, in a devolved context, who the public blame for perceived falling standards may be more complicated. While the Scottish Government sets policies for the NHS and schools in Scotland, the overall budget envelope for running those services is largely determined by the UK Government, a point often referenced by the SNP when under fire for performance in these areas. Public satisfaction with most public services is low, with under half of Scots satisfied with all the services asked about. Many services, especially GPs and hospitals, the police and schools, have declined significantly in satisfaction since 2021. And this greater complexity is reflected in the Scottish data. Scots on balance appear more likely to blame the UK government than the Scottish government. 41% mention UK government policies as a factor in failing standards in public services, while 25% mention Scottish government policies. The Scottish public recognises other factors too. 39% mention the rising costs of providing services due to inflation, and 35% think the effect of Brexit has had an impact, a little higher if anything than the 31% in England who say the same. However, any comfort the SNP Scottish Government might take from the greater apparent willingness of the Scottish public to blame the UK Government for failings in public services should be tempered by findings from other Ipsos Scotland polling, which shows that the public do not think they have been doing a good job in the key areas of education and the NHS. In March 2024, just 22% said the Scottish Government had done a good job of improving the NHS in Scotland, compared with 56% who said they had done a bad job. Similarly, only 22% said they had done a good job of improving the education system, while 48% felt they had done a bad job. If Scots are still more inclined to attribute more blame to the Conservative UK government for falling standards in public services, this clearly does not mean they are letting the Scottish government off the hook. On the other hand, neither does it necessarily mean the Scottish public are convinced that Labour, presenting themselves as the party of change in both Scotland and the wider UK, are likely to turn things around. On the NHS, while 32% thought a Labour Scottish Government would do a better job than the SNP, 30% thought they would make no difference. 19% said they'd do worse, and 17% were unsure. A similar pattern was apparent for education. At a more general level, the Scottish public are highly sceptical that it will be possible to turn around struggling public services in the next 2 to 3 years. Just 11% think it's likely they will improve in this time frame, lower than the 17% who said this across the UK as a whole. Even projecting a decade ahead, just 32% of Scots think it's likely that public services will see improvement in the next 10 years, compared with 42% of the UK as a whole. So where does this leave the parties ahead of the general election? Put simply, it leaves them all with a mountain to climb in terms of convincing the Scottish public they can make a real difference to the state of public services. All three of the biggest parties in Scotland face an electorate that appears deeply sceptical that any of them can improve things. And whatever the outcome on July 4th, both the new UK government and the Scottish government are going to have their work cut out to turn around both public services and public opinion ahead of Holyrood elections in 2026. And that was by Rachel Ormston.
From the Herald Scotland, Sunday the 9th of June, from the politics section, General Election, John Swinney, I'm loving every minute of being FM. Article written by Andrew Learmonth. John Swinney is enjoying himself. His arrival at the gig in the Garden Gala Day at the Sauchie Resource Centre in Clackmannanshire with local candidate John Nicholson has caused a bit of a stir. Kids break away from the scavenger hunt to get their picture taken with the new First Minister. Their parents and grandparents, curious locals and those here for the music and a sing stop him to bend his ear. It takes almost an hour to get around the small garden and hall. It's his third campaign stop of the day. He has already been out with his candidates in Livingston and Linlithgow. He's spoken to a theatre group, a dance troupe, local SNP activists and people out for a stroll in the park. On his wrist he's wearing a friendship bracelet gifted by Swifty he met at his last visit. The First Minister is buzzing. I think it would be fair to say that I'm loving every minute of it, all aspects of life just now, to say the least, the SNP leader tells the Herald on Sunday as we sit down for an interview. It has been just over 6 weeks since Humza Yousaf announced his intention to resign, and little more than a month since Mr Swinney was elected First Minister. There was no easing into the job. He'd only been in Butte House 2 weeks when Rishi Sunak called a general election. I've gone from my planning of gentle retirement to the full intensity of being a First Minister of Scotland and leading an election campaign, he says. But as I think it's obvious, it's an enormous privilege and an enormous excitement, and I'm loving it. It is going to be a difficult election for the SNP. The polls have suggested they could take anywhere between 7 and 35 MPs. Analysis of the surveys by Glasgow University academic and Herald columnist Mark McGaughan suggests they could end up with somewhere closer to 16, down from the 48 they won in 2019. And even if it's a good night for them, and they hold on to most of their seats, they look almost certain to lose their place as the third biggest party in the Commons, with the Liberal Democrats likely to overtake. In fact, the most recent YouGov poll puts Nigel Farage's reform within 2 points of the Tories. It is not now an entirely outlandish suggestion, and it's made by some in the Tory party, that Rishi Sunak could be about to lead his party into third place. Mr Swinney says he cannot comprehend how bad the Prime Minister's campaign has been. It's like watching an unfolding catastrophe. One of the greatest strengths and one of the greatest powers of a Prime Minister is the ability to determine the timing of an election. So, the Prime Minister used one of his strongest and greatest powers to create this situation. That, he adds, has been a disastrous decision for the Tory leader. Mr Swinney, who was in Normandy for the D-Day commemoration earlier, says the Prime Minister leaving early and missing the event with Joe Biden, Emmanuel Macron and Olaf Scholz is literally beyond comprehension. Because you cannot, I literally cannot comprehend how you would think that the right thing to do was to leave the D-Day commemorations without being part of the international commemoration. I'm now seeing material which suggests that the snub was all carefully planned because it was an event that originated from France. If that is the case, then that makes it even worse because that's us back into the really stupid territory that Liz Truss was going into, where she was humming and hawing about whether President Macron was a friend or foe. For heaven's sake, President Macron is a friend of the United Kingdom and a great ally internationally. What was she thinking about? If Rishi Sunak is falling in that groove, then it's another example of where he's unfit to be Prime Minister. It is still to be seen if the Prime Minister's early exit will have an impact on his vote north of the border, where there are a number of tight races between the SNP and the Tories. But, in most of the rest of the country, the fight will be with Labour. Mr Swinney says he has been disappointed with Sir Keir Starmer. We've got a glaring set of crises facing the country. We've got the crisis of austerity and the impact on our public services, because our public services are under colossal pressure, and I'm acutely aware of that as First Minister. The economy is being undermined every day by Brexit, and opportunities are being lost and undermined, and the public are facing a cost of living crisis. And what the Labour Party offers is a timidity of continuation of that approach. They are signed up to the same spending outlook as the Tories. They won't question Brexit. Brexit is a disaster for the UK. He points to analysis by the IFS warning the refusal to hike taxes and the commitment to bring debt down implies big spending cuts over the next 5 years. They are essentially signing up to the same spending targets as the Tories, the same fiscal discipline, and as a consequence of that, the public will suffer, he says. And that article was written by Andrew Learmonth. From the Herald Scotland, Sunday the 9th of June, from the politics section, Swinney, SNP will work with Labour government. This article is an exclusive by Andrew Learmonth. John Swinney has promised his government will work with Sir Keir Starmer and an incoming Labour administration. The First Minister told the Herald on Sunday he would positively welcome a change of leadership after what he described as years of disrespectful treatment by the Conservatives. I will pledge my government to work with the Labour UK government, he said. There are shared priorities. His comments come after Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves said a Labour government would want to work in partnership with the SNP administration in Edinburgh. Speaking to journalists in Edinburgh last Tuesday, she said it would be the only way to realise the potential of the whole UK economy. Asked if he would commit to work with Sir Keir and Ms Reeves, Mr Swinney said he would. I'm a seasoned government minister. I've seen the relationship between the two governments over a number of different administrations, he said. There were always ups and downs on different issues, there always will be. Generally, we were able to work collaboratively with the Brown government, the Cameron coalition government, the Cameron standalone government, and, ironically, on many practical issues with the Theresa May government, though it began to get increasingly difficult because of Brexit. After 2019, it has been disrespectful. Mr Swinney said he had never felt as disrespected as he was by Boris Johnson and his ministers. The Truss government was just an aberration, and the Sunak government has been no better, he added. Integral to that has been the disruptive, damaging contribution of the Scotland Office. The Scotland Office has frankly been working against Scotland. I've never seen anything like it. He said the UK government department had a dangerous and malign influence on intergovernmental relations. I would positively welcome a new government willing to work with us, he added. I will pledge my government to work with the UK government. There are shared priorities. My objective is to eradicate child poverty, and we're having to do that just now while swimming against the tide of our UK government policy direction. If I had a UK government direction that was sympathetic to that policy direction, that would make my life an awful lot more straightforward, so I signalled that willingness to do that. On Tuesday, Ms Reeves, a former Bank of England economist, was taking questions at the NatWest HQ alongside Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar. He said there had been too many manufactured fights between the devolved administration and Whitehall in recent years. He said, "We won't try and pick fights. We will try and work in Scotland's interest." Ms Reeves said Labour wanted a partnership approach with the SNP. We're only going to realise the potential of the whole UK economy if people in all parts of the UK, every nation and region, are given the opportunity to participate and play their part. So we would work with the government here, and I hope in the future that a Labour government in Westminster will be able to work with a Labour government here in Scotland, because there's so many opportunities there, but also know people in Scotland want change. They want Scotland to be part of that change. The more Scottish Labour MPs that we have working with a Labour government in Westminster, the more I think we can deliver for Scotland. But we want to work in partnership, but also looking forward to the Scottish Parliament election shortly afterwards, and hope to have a Labour government in both, but we've got this election to focus on first. And that article was an exclusive by Andrew Learmonth, and it was read to you by me, Ian McKenna. From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 10th of June, from the news section. Barclays branches in Scotland vandalised by pro-Palestine activists. Report by Josh Carmichael. Barclays branches in Scotland have been targeted by activists protesting the war in Gaza. more than 15 branches of Barclays Bank across England and Scotland, including Edinburgh and Glasgow, have been vandalised by a campaign group called Palestine Action. The activists said that in the office in Edinburgh, rocks with the names of Palestinians killed in the conflict written on them were thrown through windows. Palestine Action said branches in Moorgate, Palace Street, Richmond, Croydon, Wellington Road and Peckham in London were targeted, along with Barclays Banks in Glasgow, Exeter, Sheffield, Brighton, Northampton, Bristol, Birmingham, Solihull and Preston, Bury and Stockport. Pictures of the damage show smashed windows at branches in London and Birmingham, as well as sprayed red paint stenciled on the outside of the buildings, including the Edinburgh office, which is displayed "Drop Elbit" on the door, referring to Israeli defence company Elbit Systems. The vandalism was a joint action with newly formed climate change group called Shut the System. City of London police said 3 men were arrested over the damage to the building in Moorgate. Palestine Action and Shut the System accused Barclays of having financial interest in selling weapons to Israel and in funding fossil fuel companies. The group said radical direct action tactics such as these will continue until Barclays stops investing in certain companies. A spokesperson for Barclays said, "We provide vital financial services to US, UK and European public companies that supply defence products to NATO and its allies. Barclays does not directly invest in these companies. The defence sector is fundamental to our national security, and the UK government has been clear that supporting defence companies is compatible with ESG, environmental, social and governance considerations. Decisions on the implementation of arms embargoes to other nations are the job of respective elected governments. While we support the right to protest, we ask that campaigners do so in a way which respects our customers, colleagues and property." And that report was by Josh Carmichael. From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 10th of June, from the news section, dates set for return of full services at Ayr train station. Report by Josh Carmichael. Direct train services between Ayr and Glasgow will return to normal next week, following the completion of safety works at the fire-damaged Ayr Station Hotel. Electric services at Ayr Station have been off since the former Ayr Station Hotel was set on fire in September last year. Replacement buses were put on between Ayr and Prestwick until December last year, then a shuttle train service using one of the station's platforms. However, it was withdrawn at the start of this month, with Network Rail carried out works to resume services as normal. Now, the National Rail Operator has confirmed that direct electric services between Ayr and Glasgow will resume on Monday to line up with the South Ayrshire Council's demolition works at the building concluding. Network Rail bosses say engineers are already removing debris and repairing the tracks in preparation for the return of trains. Liam Sumter, Managing Director, Network Rail, said, "Our thanks go to South Ayrshire Council for completing the critical safety work at the former Ayr Station Hotel. Our teams are working hard to have the track ready and, alongside our colleagues at ScotRail, we're looking forward to welcoming passengers back to the station and onto services next week. We'd like to thank passengers in the Ayr community for their patience and understanding during the station closure." Bosses say a full timetable with the return of services between Kilmarnock, Ayr, Girvan and Stranraer is expected to be in operation by mid-July. David Lister, ScotRail Safety, Sustainability and Asset Director, said, "The devastating fire at the former station hotel has had a significant impact on ScotRail services in the southwest of Scotland, and we have worked closely and collaboratively with South Ayrshire Council, Network Rail and other partners during this challenging period. We know how much people rely on rail services, so we're pleased that from 17th June we'll be able to reintroduce electric services between Ayr and Glasgow, and will work with Network Rail to complete all activities required to re-establish services south of Ayr due to the extended period of closure. We're grateful to customers for their patience and understanding while we work towards the full return of services later in July." and that article was by Josh Carmichael. From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 10th of June, from the politics section. Douglas Ross resignation, not how I'd have envisaged it. By Gabriel Mackay. Douglas Ross has admitted the timing of his resignation as leader of the Scottish Conservatives is not how I would envisioned it. The Tory leader is standing for Parliament in the Aberdeenshire North and Moray East seat, controversially replacing David Dogood after he was ruled out by the party after a recent illness. Mr Ross put himself forward for the seat and was selected, which sparked a backlash from many in his own party. He had initially planned to stay on as both an MP and MSP, as well as continuing in his job as a football referee, but announced on Monday morning that he will stand down as leader. In addition, he pledged to stand down as an MSP if he does not win the Aberdeenshire seat. As what the reaction from his colleagues had been, Mr Ross said, "Many of them have not just been saying to me but to the media that they were unhappy. Clearly, it had always been my intention to continue as an MSP up until the general election. The circumstances changed very quickly last week. There was a vacancy in a key seat which is a straight fight between the Scottish Conservatives and the SNP. I put myself forward and was selected by the local association there because I want to beat the SNP. That Aberdeenshire North and Moray East seat is one of the key seats up and down the country where it's a straight choice between the Scottish Conservatives and the SNP. I've been out indoors in Fraserburgh and Banff in the constituency over the weekend reiterating that message, but today I'm very clear I'm standing down as leader. This will be my final general election campaign as party leader, and I'm focusing on ensuring we can win these key seats up and down the country. The timing is not how I would envisaged it, but I think it's right to take these decisions and take them at the time. I've reflected over the weekend on what colleagues and others have said. I'm absolutely committed as the candidate for the Conservative and Unionist Party for Aberdeenshire North and Moray East." Mr Ross also faced questions over some of his expenses claims. The Sunday Mail reported that his aides had identified 28 potentially dodgy claims relating to his work as a referee. Details were leaked to the press by a party staffer unhappy at the decision to oust Mr Dogood. The Sunday Mail said they had seen messages from November 2021 which saw Mr Ross' closest aides refer to them as dodgy and suggest they bluff it out. The outgoing Tory leader said, "I was very clear in my comment to the paper that ran that story that I'm very comfortable with the expenses I've claimed have been to do with fulfilling my role as a Member of Parliament and travel to and from Westminster. In terms of them being submitted, they are done through IPSA, the independent body. I'm more than happy for IPSA to scrutinise them again." And that article was by Gabriel Mackay. From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 10th of June, from the Voices section. Herald Diary. The Glasgow cabbie who was a gold mine for rumours. Report by Lorne Jackson. Carry On Cabbie. A Tale of Music in Motion. Back in the 1980s, reader Phil Riley drove a black taxi cab and was based in the Glasgow city centre. At the time, there was a fabled fellow cabbie who loved 70s rock music, especially the oeuvre of Stevie Nicks, Lindsay Buckingham, Mick Fleetwood, not forgetting John and Christy McVie. This chap played his favourite tunes loud and incessantly in the cab, usually singing along. He wouldn't turn the volume down a notch, even when he had a passenger. Perhaps inevitably, his colleagues referred to him as Fleetwood Hack. Poor things. Life was harsh in the bad old days. Reader Jack Pollard tells us his father grew up painfully poor in a working class district of Aberdeen where everyone struggled to make ends meet. You could tell the folk who were rich in our street, Jack's father once recalled. They put their bins out every week, which meant they had stuff to throw away. Feeling listless. I've been crossing things off my to-do list, says proud reader Eleanor Bradford. I didn't do them, I just don't want them on my list anymore. Era's Error. The diary is still recovering from the Taylor Swift concerts that shook Scotland to its pop music core. With a sense of bitter resignation, our team of reporters have dumped their Tinstall miniskirts and cowboy hats in the office wardrobe, knowing that we will only get the chance to wear them again when the diary editor pops his clogs and we attend to his wake. Meanwhile, reader Robert Menzies claimed it was a mistake to stage Taylor's Eras tour in Edinburgh's Moneyfield Stadium rather than Glasgow's Hampden Park. Can't help wondering, says Robert, if this was simply to prevent Ouija's pointing at the old stadium and saying, Eras. Dry humour. The diary reported that Glasgow is holding an alcohol-free music festival which will limit the type of songs that can be performed. Reader Linda Chapman says, they can play the Housemartins hit Happy Hour, but they'll have to change the title to Unhappy Hour. Musical mauling. Let's play a game. Reader Matt Simmons wants us to ruin famous bands or singers by adding just one letter to their name. Matt gets the ball rolling by slowing down the success of a famous rock group. So, grungy grunters 9 Inch Nails become 9 Inch Snails. Insightful comment. Depressed reader Megan Rutherford tells us, being told I was colourblind came right out of the purple. And that was today's Herald Diary, edited by Lauren Jackson and read by me, Ian McKenna. From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 10th of June, from the business section, Business Insight. Welcome investment news to fuel Scotland's space race. Report by Christy Dorsey, business correspondent. The cost of putting a satellite into orbit has fallen dramatically since the days when space was a government-dominated industry, but launching a rocket and its payload still requires a serious amount of cash. Companies such as Edinburgh-based Aurora Avionics are working to bring down those costs in the commercial sector race to meet the seemingly limitless demand for satellite tracking, monitoring and communications. In the case of Aurora, it is developing an off-the-shelf electronic navigation system to get rockets to their intended destination at less expense. The Scottish space industry is one of the fastest growing in Europe, with more than 150 companies employing in excess of 8,000 people. It also boasts end-to-end capabilities spanning satellite and rocket manufacturing through to data and applications development. The big question is whether companies in Scotland can overcome the country's historic difficulties in accessing the scale-up funding required to compete on an extremely competitive world stage. While the US remains the epicentre of space activity, others are rapidly upping their game. According to researchers at McKinsey, at least 70 countries now have established national space agencies, and 20 have estimated civil spending of more than $100 million, £79.3 million, per year. Today's announcement that the Scottish Space Network has partnered with New York advisory firm Sustainable Alpha to funnel more international investment into the Scottish sector is therefore welcome news. Their aim is to secure opportunities for the global investment community to back early-stage space technology businesses in this country and further afield. In what is said to be a first for the Scottish sector, the collaboration will initially focus on funding needs within the industry and development of a comprehensive investment strategy. Andy Campbell, who founded the Scottish Space Network in 2022, said the partnership with Sustainable Alpha will be the first of several key collaborations to drive support for the sector. He is also asking companies to share their future investment requirements to help the network tailor its support for the industry. All things being well, Scotland will later this year become home to the first vertical space launch anywhere in Western Europe when Rocket Factory Augsburg, RFA, sends its first ship into orbit from the Saxford spaceport on the Lambda Mass Peninsula of Uns. Maintaining this leading position and reaping the economic rewards from a growing global industry will hinge to a great extent on financing from initiatives such as the Scottish Space Network collaboration. And that report was by Christy Dorsey.
The Herald on the 11th of June and the news section. Deaths in Scotland lower than expected in first quarter of 2024 by Mark McDougall. The number of registered deaths in Scotland is almost 9% lower than expected during the first quarter of 2024. New figures published by the National Records of Scotland have shown that 16,755 deaths were registered between January 1 and March 31, and that is 8.9% lower than the expected figure of 18,391. Deaths have been lower throughout every age group too, and that continues a trend that is seen in the second half of 2023 and into 2024. Deaths among people aged 65 and younger were down 4%, with the 65 to 79 age group 8% lower than expected, while there were 1,051, 11% less deaths among people aged 80 and over in the first 3 months of 2024. It is a similar story for births, with figures showing that only 11,560 were registered in the first quarter of this year, down 4.6% on the 5-year average. The comparison over 5 years doesn't include 2020 because they were severely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, and therefore the 5 years have been from 2018 to 19 and then 2021 to 2023. Philippa Haxton, head of Vital Event Statistics at NRS, said the number of deaths was almost 9% lower than our expected number for this time of year. The method for calculating excess deaths accounts for large numbers of babies born post-war reaching the age groups at which end of life is more likely. The previous method did not adjust for the increasing size of this group and underestimated how many deaths there would be in the population. And that was by Mark McDougall.
This is from the Herald Scotland of Tuesday the 11th of June 2024 from the business section. Hotel with Robert Burns links for sale as owners retire. This article is by Ian McConnell. A Scottish hotel which can trace its roots back around 250 years and counts poet Robert Burns amongst past lodgers has been put up for sale, with offers around 1.35 million sought. The Selkirk Arms Hotel on Kirkcudbright High Street is being sold by Chris and Sue Walker, described by joint selling agents Graham and Sibbald and Smith and Clough Business Associates as veterans in the hotel business in Dumfries and Galloway for around 40 years. Chris and Sue Walker have owned and operated the Selkirk Arms for 17 years, and the sale will signal their retirement from the trade, the joint agents noted. Graham and Sibbald and Smith and Clough said that a hostelry at the Selkirk Arms has been in existence for well over 250 years. The hotel, which has 17 letting bedrooms, notes on its website, the Selkirk Arms Hotel dates back from 1777 and is known to have had Robert Burns as a lodger on several occasions around 1794. Although there are conflicting stories as to the origin of the Selkirk Grace, many believe that it was at this very hotel that Burns penned the famous grace prior to attending a dinner hosted by the Earl of Selkirk at his home on St Mary's Isle. Graham and Sibbald and Smith and Clough said, "The Selkirk Arms Hotel is everything you can expect of a good and attractive townhouse hotel property, offering 17 ensuite letting bedrooms, bars, restaurants, lounges and meeting rooms, complemented by an enclosed garden area with seating terrace for alfresco F&B, the food and the beverage activities." Alistair Letham, a hotel and leisure consultant with Graham and Sibbald, said, "The Selkirk Arms Hotel has been a well-established hospitality venue for many years. In their tenure, Chris and Sue Walker have spent many years upgrading and developing the property, creating the now profitable business. New owners can capitalise upon the secure income, which is showing further growth in 2024. Graham Smith, a director with Smith and Clough, said, Having worked alongside Alistair on several occasions, we are delighted to be jointly marketing the Selkirk Arms Hotel on behalf of Chris and Sue Walker. Over the years, they have established their hotel as one of the finest establishments in the area, with a very steady trading performance, which produces high levels of profitability. That article was by Ian McConnell. This is from the Herald Scotland of Tuesday, the 11th of June 2024, from the business section. Scottish port future-proofed as EV firm targets rollout. This article is by Scott Wright. Scotland's only private electric vehicle charging point provider has declared it will accelerate the rollout of its infrastructure network following a £10 million funding boost. For EV, led by former Scottish Enterprise Chief Steve Dunlop, received the funding boost from the Scottish National Investment Bank, the SNIB. It is the third time the state-backed development bank has invested in the business after it followed its initial backing of £2 million in 2021 with a £10 million injection the year after. Edinburgh-based 4EV said the latest round of funding will support its plans to deliver high-quality, accessible electric vehicle charging hubs across the UK while expanding its fleet proposition. The investment was announced shortly after 4EV announced its latest charging point at the Loch Ryan ferry port in Cairnryan near Stranraer. The point will give the 1.3 million customers who use Stena Line access to rapid vehicle charging. The new charging hub, which can charge 8 electric vehicles simultaneously and provide around 320 charging sessions a day, is the result of a public-private joint venture between 4EV and South of Scotland Enterprise SOSE. SOSE has invested £170,000 into the facility within the landslide area of the port, which forms part of the Cairnryan-Belfast route, the UK's busiest domestic short sea route. The hub can also be used by the local community, providing a much-needed boost to the electric vehicle charging infrastructure in the area. 2 additional charge points have also been specially installed for use by Police Scotland. Lindsay Wallace, Executive Director of Sales and Innovations for Europe at 4EV, said, "Our newest hub will future-proof Stena Line's Loch Ryan port while also providing local people, who until now have suffered from a dearth of EV charging infrastructure in their area, with improved access to high-quality charging facilities." The £10 million of follow-on investment from the bank will support our ambitious plans to further improve EV infrastructure across the country. For example, we hope to work with SOSE to explore other prospective charging sites that will help accelerate the development of a robust EV infrastructure for Dumfries and Galloway and the Scottish borders. This will support and encourage more businesses and communities to adopt electric vehicles as we journey towards a net zero future. The SNIB opened in November 2020 with £2 billion of public money to invest in Scottish firms engaged in 3 critical missions: the drive to net zero, tackling place-based inequality, and harnessing innovation to help people flourish. Prior to the latest investment in 4EV, it had invested around £640 million in 35 deals since it came into being. Andy Clapp, Executive Director at the Scottish National Investment Bank, said, "The provision of sufficient charging points is an essential part of Scotland's net zero transition. We are pleased to back 4EV's ambitious plans and its ability to grow and scale as a company, delivering widespread environmental and economic impact. 4EV is aligned to the bank's mission to help deliver a net zero Scotland." Martin Valenti, Director of Net Zero, Nature and Entrepreneurship at SOSE, said, By supporting 4EV to install new rapid EV charge points at Loch Ryan Port, we've significantly improved the port's infrastructure. This investment will provide a boost to drivers who have already made the transition to electric vehicles, encourage more to make the switch, and help the south of Scotland play a key role in the wider goal to reach net zero by 2045. Andrew Kane, Regional Port Operations Manager at Stena Line, said, "At a time when electric vehicle usage is increasing rapidly, the introduction of the port's new EV charging infrastructure, provided by 4EV, will help to meet customer demand for charging services. Customers will now have the convenience of rapid charging their vehicle before boarding or after disembarkation of our vessels to continue their journey seamlessly. Stena Line has ambitious sustainability goals, and introducing infrastructure such as this within our ports to support our customers' own sustainability is key to reaching our targets." That article was by Scott Wright.
The Herald on the 11th of June and the news section. AI system developed in Glasgow could help improve cancer diagnosis, by Mark McDougall. A team of researchers from the University of Glasgow have worked alongside colleagues in New York to develop an AI system to help improve cancer diagnosis. The new system, called Histomorphological Phenotype Learning, HPL, has been spotting the signs of the disease in tests with remarkable accuracy, according to those involved. An international team of AI specialists and cancer scientists are behind the breakthrough, and it's believed it can also help provide reliable predictions of patient outcomes. Currently, pathologists examine tissue samples under a microscope to provide doctors with support on how to treat each patient and help them with an idea of their recovery chances. But the AI could make that much quicker for everyone involved and help pathologists get results to doctors and therefore onto patients in much quicker ways. The team have outlined how they have developed and trained the system in a new paper released in the Nature Communications journal. They started with their research by collecting high-resolution images of tissue samples from 452 patients stored in the United States National Cancer Institute's database, and then developed an algorithm to analyze the images and spot patterns based solely on the visual data on each slide. The paper's senior author was Dr. Ki Yuan, and said, "We didn't provide the algorithm with any insight into what the samples were or what we expected it to find. Nonetheless, it learned to spot recurring visual elements in the tiles, which correspond to textures, cell properties, and tissue architectures called phenotypes. By comparing these visual elements across a whole series of images it recognized phenotypes which often appeared together, independently picking out the architectural patterns that human pathologists had already identified in the samples. When the team then added analysis of slides from squamous cell lung cancer, it was able to tell the difference between that and a lung adenocarcinoma, which was in the initial data to 99% accuracy. The predictions were made by the system linked well with the outcome of real-life patients and correctly assessed the likelihood and timing of any cancer return to 72%, which is better than human pathologists at 64%. The research was then broadened to include other types of cancer, including breast, prostate, and bladder, and returned similar results as the initial tests. Professor John LeQuince said, "We were surprised but very pleased by the effectiveness of machine learning to tackle this task. It takes many years to train human pathologists to identify the cancer subtypes they examine under the microscope and draw conclusions about the most likely outcome for patients. It's a difficult, time-consuming job, and even highly trained experts can sometimes draw different conclusions from the same slide. In a sense, the algorithm at the heart of the HPL system taught itself from first principles to speak the language of cancer, to recognize the extremely complex patterns in the slides and read what they can tell us about both the type of cancer and its potential effect on patients' long-term health. Unlike a human pathologist, it doesn't understand what it's looking at, but it can still draw strikingly accurate conclusions based on mathematical analysis. It could prove to be an invaluable tool to aid pathologists in the future, augmenting their existing skills with an entirely unbiased second opinion. The insight provided by human expertise and AI analysis working together could provide faster, more accurate cancer diagnoses and evaluations of patients' likely outcomes. That, in turn, could help improve monitoring and better tailored care across each patient's treatment. And that was by Mark McDougall. The Herald on the 11th of June and the news section. Harvey calls for end to hostile environment against refugees by Jody Harrison. The next UK government, elected on July 4, must end the hostile environment policies drawn up to discourage refugees from entering the country and build an open and inclusive system instead, the Scottish Greens have argued. The party's co-leader, Patrick Harvey, attacked 14 years of anti-refugee policies he insisted have punished vulnerable people and families, and seen thousands detained in awful prison-like conditions ahead of a visit to a Glasgow-based charity on Tuesday. The Scottish Greens have called for the immediate repeal of the Rwanda deal and an end to the use of brutal detention centres and institutional accommodation such as barracks, hotel and barges to house refugees. The Rwanda agreement is signed by former Home Secretary Priti Patel on April 14, 2022, paved the way for migrants to be handed a one-way ticket to the East African nation if they were deemed to have arrived in the UK illegally. Conservative Party leader Rishi Sunak has described the plan as an indispensable deterrent and insisted he will see it through if he is re-elected, but has admitted no flights will take off before the general election. Mr. Harvey said the hostile environment is one of the most awful, shameful and racist legacies of this Tory government. They have thrived on spreading fear and division and have treated people's lives like political pawns in their culture war. From dawn raids to prison-like detention and deportation flights to Rwanda, they have chased right-wing headlines rather than showing humanity. Our public services and local businesses all over Scotland are crying out for more workers, but that has been made much harder by a Tory government that has inflicted a disastrous Brexit and has shown total contempt for the rights of some of the world's most vulnerable people. The Conservatives have made this so much worse, but the shameful truth is that it began under the last Labour government, and I don't have any confidence that Keir Starmer's party will make the break that's needed. Freedom, empathy, compassion and solidarity are at the heart of the system we want to see. Every vote for the Scottish Greens will be a strike against the politics of hate and in favour of dismantling a racist and reactionary Home Office that is not fit for purpose. And that was by Jody Harrison.
That concludes this week's edition of the Herald Scotland Podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels at Hear and Review and tell your friends about our service.